All right, so this space makes me a little nervous. A few years ago, the undergraduates voted me as the faculty most likely to trip and fall while I was giving a lecture. So I feel like I should just hold on to the podium given everybody's tripping with the microphone and whatnot. Okay. All right, so the question that I was interested in was looking at the connections between soil health and food security. So if we were to optimize soil health, how would that support food security, and vice versa? If we were to think about optimizing production for food security, how would that affect soil health? We really don't know much about connecting those dots. So you hear a lot about the modeling going on the agriculture side that, like Naomi was talking about, and then we have modeling on the human health side. But connecting those dots across the two models hasn't been done so far, and we really don't know the extent or magnitude with which healthier soils could impact food security dimensions. One of the places I wanted to start, though, because I think a lot of you might be new to the term food security in terms of exactly what the definition means, was defining food security for you. So this is the Food and Agriculture's definition of food security. You have to meet 4 criteria in order to be considered food secure. And essentially what this is showing you are those 4 criteria, which is that all people at all times should have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious foods. And what we know right now is that a little over 2 billion of a little over 7 billion of the global population falls short of one or more of these criteria. There are a couple of things to know about that particular estimate, about a quarter of the population are considered food insecure, and that is that the estimate is, it's not a very good estimate in some ways, right? It's really, really hard to predict the number of food insecure people. And part of that is because we have very little data on the access, utilization, and stability criteria within this definition. Another reason is this is really based on quantity, not quality. So we're looking at food insecurity around people being deficient of calories, but not necessarily micronutrient deficient. And you heard earlier that about 1/3 to a half might be deficient in iron. So this definition's not capturing all, or this estimate is not capturing all of that. It's also really hard to get at the short-term changes or pinpoint on geographies where some of the problems might be happening, even though we know generally where this might be, where people might be more food insecure. We also don't have household level data to produce that estimate. And then for a time, we were really progressing on reducing food insecurity globally, and that's really slowed down a lot. And there are 4 reasons that are really related, a lot of them, to soil health and thinking about what we do with the soil. The first is that we really have a finite amount of land. So while the global population has tripled in the last 50 years, the amount of cultivated land has only increased by about 12%. So we're having to produce more and more food on less and less land. Also thinking about the competition for natural resources. So now you've got people competing for water use for agriculture production at the same time for drinking water. So it's created a lot of complexities there. The second reason is really competition for other land uses. So thinking about urbanization or biofuels, using corn for biofuels. The third reason, we've really seen a lot of yield plateaus. And a lot of that's due to soil erosion and soil degradation. And is related to the soil. And then the fourth, which you've heard about from the prior presentations, is climate change, extreme weather events, and global economic shocks. And I think we've seen examples of the global economic shocks that were really due to climate change with some of the 2008 food riots and some of that other. The other thing I wanted to just kind of briefly touch on when looking at this definition is, where's the data? Where's the evidence base so far across these 4 criteria? So I think most of you in the room would agree that we have a lot of information around availability. So we've looked a lot at yield, and we know a lot about crop yield. But we know a whole lot less about crop management practices and how that might relate to the quality of the micronutrients or the phytochemicals and other things that are beneficial for human health. We know a lot less about the relationship there and how different types of soil management practices might impact or cause those to vary. The other thing to note here around the quality, this availability criteria, is that oftentimes when we look at when we start to infer or model about the quality of like fruits and vegetables based on soil management practices, it's almost it's taking data from wheat or other commodity crops where we have a whole lot more data. So some of our more important phytochemicals may not be being included in some of these inferences that we're making. In the second category around access, so this is really, looking at whether people have adequate income to access enough food to eat and enough food of enough high quality. So consider this statistic. Agriculture is the main source of income for 70 to 80% of people who currently suffer from hunger in developing countries. So if you have people who are dependent upon agriculture as their source of income, then to be able to access food, you can see where climate change and some of the extreme weather events and some of the other challenges that agricultural production is facing will have some continued challenges here. The data here is largely from modeling, and there's some great models out there. IFPRI's impact model is one of the ones that comes to the top of my head right away. But you have to remember that there's a lot of assumptions that go in these models, and they're still truthing them and finding out if the assumptions and the estimates they're making are coming true, so to speak. The other thing is it's hard to model how factors co-vary. So the data here is really based on the models, and the modelers themselves will tell you that it's really hard to incorporate extreme shocks. So anytime there's an extreme weather event or an economic shock, they haven't really gotten a good handle on that to put it into the model. The data in that third category, so utilization of food, so this is thinking about things like competing healthy, clean drinking water, or floods maybe threatening sanitation, or whether people can utilize some of the food they're growing. Here, we see some data, but maybe not being connected. So there's some data, we've heard mention of things like the metals concentrated in our soils or pharmaceutical products that might be showing up. And people are doing studies, but they haven't been connected into the models as well to sort of look at impacts there. And then finally, stability, thinking about the data here. Again, this is based on some of the food models, and the modelers will tell you it's very, very hard to incorporate some of these small shocks on the supply and demand side, which can have really large impacts on food prices and affect food security. So where do we go from here? So the questions that I generated thinking about the relationship between soil health and food security is basically understanding the extent, magnitude, and frequency with which soils impact food security, also considering the uncertainties that we have around climate change, extreme weather events, land use competition, population growth, and urbanization. But also thinking about if we were to optimize soil health for food security, what does that do to other ecosystem goods and ecosystems? So thinking about that relationship. And then I think the third question we need to answer is what social, economic, and political conditions are needed to facilitate the relationship. And globally, this becomes very hard when you think about water rights between countries and who receives water and where dams are built and whatnot. And suddenly the supply of water is cut off for food production. So what do we need to do around those social, political, and economic domains in order to ensure food security, soil health, and whatnot? Similar to Dr. Peters, I think there's a lot of multi-scale modeling that needs to happen, but in this particular topic, I think a lot of primary data collection needs to happen at the household level too, and at different geographic levels, because right now, the data is in the aggregate. It's not at the household level. Like I was talking about, that estimate is just, it's very, very, it is an estimate, and we could use a whole lot more data to refine it. In terms of the intended results and impact, looking at how we do both, like the other speakers have mentioned, we need everybody. And I think there can be some research done here at the pilot levels, but then also we need 10-year type data in order to really do a good job of this, and some of the similar estimates around resources required and possible sources of funding. So with that, I will turn it back to Naomi. And try not to trip.